guys, it's me from Satsuma Diaries, and I hope you're having a great day. I just wanted to check in and mention one of my favorite topics, which is creativity. And I thought we could discuss creativity in the context of spirituality and sacred meditation and how those things sort of intersect and overlap at times. I think it's just an interesting topic, and I am a creative person, so I thought I would share a little bit about my process and how it's really like fed into my spirituality. So I'll go ahead and jump in and just start off with a basic introduction to how I'm accessing creativity. And everybody's different, obviously, in this area, but what I'm interested in creatively is basically writing and the visual arts, to just keep it very broad. Specifically, I really enjoy the book art, so that's kind of where like writing and the visual arts intersect. I really enjoy calligraphy and pen and ink illustration and woodblock printing. So that's a lot of different mediums, but really I like writing and visual art. So anything in those broad categories, I'm really inspired by. So the one thing I want to say about the arts is that for some of us, creativity is one of our soul themes or our life themes or one of our spiritual gifts. And how you know if that is true for you is if it brings you a lot of joy and happiness to do something creative, whether that's like cooking or photography or drawing or videography. It could be anything creative, really. But if it fills you up with, if it makes you feel alive and it makes you feel blissful, that is how you know you're onto something. Um, so, one thing I want to mention here, sorry, there was a bunch of motorcycles going by. One thing I wanted to mention at this point is if you haven't asked about life purpose in meditation, I definitely recommend that as like a fundamental activity in meditation. That's like your primary task, is ask your inner wisdom or your spirit guides, if you have dialogue with them, what is my life purpose? What are my spiritual gifts in this life? If you have to, go in every night for weeks and ask that. The more deeply you go into that inquiry, the more information you'll get. And I think that is like a really important step in the spiritual development process. So I do want to say that. But the reason I'm going so deeply with creativity is because it is one of my life purposes. My God showed me that very clearly in those first few months that I opened up psychically. And this was after like prolonged meditation. So if you haven't started exploring prolonged sacred meditation, I'll link my video on basics of meditation so you can get into that too. So, what does creativity have to do with spirituality or with meditation? I think that it's really interesting where these two things overlap. Certainly, I have friends who are exploring the arts in a secular way, and that has its place, and that often creates really great art. Art doesn't have to be sacred or divinely inspired for it to be good, but it's interesting when you can pull off both, when you can make good art and be tapping in spiritually. Um, so basically, when I was talking about creativity, and if it fills you up, if it feels like it might be one of your life purposes or like a spiritual gift because it brings you so much happiness, that's how you know. Um, you're going to want to make time for that every day. If I could, I would just underline that in bold letters. Make time for your creativity every day. If it's a part of your life purpose, if it really brings you a lot of happiness and fulfillment. And the reason that is because joy and happiness and fulfillment and deep satisfaction means, when you feel those things, that means you're deeply resonant with divine presence. Those of us who have felt in prolonged meditation um, the mystical experience of ecstatic meditation, you could call it nirvana. Um, God feels like joy. God feels like an incredible, unspeakable, incomprehensible amount of bliss, right? So when you feel all that happiness, that means that you're very close to God. That means that you're resonant with divine energy. And that is always a good thing. It's a good thing because the more you match and reflect God, the closer to God you become, the more like God you become. This is holiness. This is about bringing in a lot of holiness into your life and into your being. And the more holiness that you bring into your being, the better. And for those of us who are consciously on a mystical path and we're actively working on ourselves and growing spiritually, and we desire to grow spiritually, that is the whole process, is connecting with divinity, connecting with holiness, and letting it clear us of anything that doesn't match with it, that isn't based in love, and healing emotional wounds or healing our physical body, letting go of childhood trauma, letting go of past life trauma. That's what happens when holiness comes into you. And then it just fills you, all that space that you created when you let go of stuff that um, is not from God, when it's just from pain and wounds. When you let go of that stuff, you create so much space for God to fill you. And what happens when you start filling up with divine presence is your spiritual gifts come online, which is the most miraculous, enriching thing that you can explore in this life. Um, that is a very deep work to explore, of course, but when your spiritual gifts start coming online, it's like you're living in miracles every day. You start knowing things that you couldn't possibly know. You start healing spontaneously. You start getting information from friends and family about what they need to do for healing. I mean, it is holy. It's holy business, filling yourself up with happiness and joy and bliss, because you're filling yourself up with divine presence, actually. So anyway, this is all just to say that creativity is a God-given gift, especially if it's your life purpose, but it is also a path to God. And it's a path to enlightenment. So that's why I say make time for it every day. My guides have specifically told me that what brings us joy is our spiritual center, right? So when you feel time go away and you feel like you're in flow and your heart is racing because you're so loving what you're doing and you're so excited and you're so on purpose and you just feel alive, that is your spiritual center. Go home every day if you can. That's your spiritual home, right? Or your inner home. That is a compass with which to navigate this life. When the world is in chaos, like it is right now, and it has been for a long time, we need those inner resources more than ever, right? So make 30 minutes, 15 minutes a day for your art. It's important. And one of the books that actually a friend recommended to me back in the day, and it's a classic, but it's The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And I'll link it on my blog post. But I love this book, and it is sort of a nourishing book, and it's about nourishing your inner artist. And she recommends making space every day for your practice, but it is really important. And it actually, the subtext is a spiritual path to higher creativity. So she's definitely exploring this concept too, where like the spiritual and the creative intersect. So talked about that. Yeah, just wanted to like mention that my guides have told me, they've shown me in visions that my art connects me with God. That obviously, like, my creativity is God given through my life purpose, and it probably is for you too if you're watching this, but that it also is my connection, a way to stay connected to divine presence. Um, so, so that's, it's almost like going to mass or to church every week. Go into your creativity, because that is where you'll find spirit. And then, of course, I hadn't mentioned this yet, but of course, there is the concept of divine inspiration, and that certainly happens. my guides have shown me that they're working with me on my writing all the time. They've shown me like a pen on my third eye and like, a pen and ink. They're writing on my third eye and they've shown me that my writing is coming from them in a lot of cases. And it's spooky and mysterious, but it's very cool. And when you get inspiration and you act on it, it does feel divine. It feels magical and it feels, there's nothing like it. It's mysterious, but it's very, very cool. And it's a gift. And my guides are smarter than me. They're advanced beings. And the messages that they give me are like extremely wise and so well said. And I would absolutely let them take the wheel creatively because they're talented and they're advanced. So they can only make your art better, trust me. Yeah, and so the concept I wrote on my notes, this goes back to the old concept of the muse, right? Like the spirit that hovers around the artist or the writer and gives them the idea, or gives them the words. That's totally a thing, and it doesn't happen every time, but when it happens, you can kind of feel it because you're just very on, right? Like you're almost like so on that you're like, I don't know if I would have come up with that exact phrasing because it's really good. um, and I don't want to keep this brief, but I just wanted to mention one aspect of creativity that was a surprise to me, but it totally was a game changer, was integrating both the divine feminine and divine masculine into my process. And by that, I mean, definitely check out my yin yang polarity video to get to know these two principles more. But divine feminine represents like the receptive state of consciousness, the vast openness aspect of consciousness, or the womb, the space that can receive higher energy, right? And then the masculine is the outward aspect of consciousness, the action oriented aspect of consciousness. It's what makes you do something about the inspiration, right? And it's also a highly structured energy. It's the container that holds this like wild, untamed energy that is the feminine. And so the reason I mention this is because I always used to like be very yin, very feminine in my creativity. Like if I had the impulse or the urge or like the spontaneous desire to create something, I would. And I was just kind of like wild and like very sporadic with it. And I always loved it, but I just, wasn't progressing and growing as an artist because I wasn't using the masculine practice of structure and discipline. And so actually I started doing this whenever I discovered this book in a little bookshop on Orcas Island in Washington. I'm going to link that bookshop because I miss it. But I found this awesome book and I just love it. It's Daily Rituals, and it's about writers, composers, painters, philosophers, thinkers on how they create their creations, basically how they live their day and how they design their lifestyle to hold a practice for their creative work. And that opened my eyes to the fact that, okay, it's not an accident that people, that are brilliant thinkers and artists throughout the ages have created great works. It was not an accident. They just didn't stumble upon their works. They were hard workers. They showed up every day in a disciplined way, and actually often the same way every day. That's what astounded me. There was nothing like, I mean, there were a couple of people who didn't have routines, but the large majority of these very successful creatives had a routine and they stuck to it and they showed up for the work every day, and they had an incredible amount of discipline. This is just not a skill set of mine in my early life. I only started doing this a couple years ago, but when I did, I started waking up at 5 a.m. before work. This is something that Mary Oliver did. And I just would write for a couple of hours before work. And oh my gosh, I grew so much as a writer. It was amazing. It was a lot of bad writing, still writing a ton of bad writing actually, but just getting the words on the page going through that much practice inevitably made me a stronger swimmer creatively. And then even if my short story could have been better, that I had 20 pages of a finished short story was a new thing for me, because before I was just, you know, just so sporadic and so spontaneous that I wasn't creating a body of work. And now I have a sense of progress and a sense of movement, and I have a decent body of work, like I said, like an output. And that came from the masculine, the divine masculine, and that structure. So anyway, those are my tips for you. Make time for your creative practice because it is holy. Definitely ask in meditation what your life purpose is, what your spiritual gift is. Pick up this book, The Artist's Way, if you haven't already. It's a classic. And pick up this book too, the Daily Rituals book. I've given it to a lot of my writing friends and they all love it, so I definitely recommend it. And just honor both that receptive feminine state of consciousness and that masculine structured state of consciousness. You need both to be to really thrive creatively. So I hope that helps. I hope you found that interesting, and hope you guys are all well and happy and peaceful, and hopefully exploring something creative right now with all this extra time we have on our hands. So I'll definitely have a post up about this on my blog at satsumadiaries.com. Come find me over there, where we're discussing lots of topics in spirituality and conscious living. I'll make another video soon. In the meantime, I will be over at my blog, satsumadiaries.com. I'll see you soon.